Hello everyone, and welcome to the 5th episode of Best of History Scene. Now, in this episode, the cast and the crew of the show are going to pick their favorite segments. And I might add, you never know what they're going to come up with. So, stay tuned.
It may not be the biggest, it's just a little show with stories of Virginia and places you may know. It's about the times and faces that made us who we are. We'll take you to those places, we'll travel near and far. We have history around every tree. We have old-time tales to hear and see. Our past will come alive again on your TV screen, while having fun with good old friends here on History Scene, where all the places and faces are traces of history. You'll see us then, you'll see us now, here on History Scene. History.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. This is the last of the series of Best of shows of History Scene. Beginning next month, we have brand new shows in Season 3. Can you believe it? So stay tuned beginning next month for some very interesting stories behind the history. Well, welcome back, everyone. Let's get to our first picks. Now, to make the first choice, I'm here with our own hat man, Bill Huber. What have we got, Bill?
First of all, I want to thank you for picking this beautiful location.
Well,
I mean, it's gorgeous down here.
It is great, but the reason we're here is because our executive producer didn't want to get up early, so I'm in his backyard.
Oh, okay. If you're asking, I love it when we do great people in history. And my favorite, Matthew Fontaine Maury.
History.
I'm standing in the middle of Spotsylvania County in a landlocked forest so thick that it's been called the wilderness for 2 centuries. I want to emphasize landlocked. Yes, the county borders on the Rappahannock River. There are streams of water running through it, but we're not talking the 7 seas here. Yet, a man born on January 14th, 1806, in a house right down that pathway, went on to become one of the greatest navigators of the 19th century. He was the first superintendent of the U.S. Naval Observatory, and he gained the name Pathfinder of the Seas. That man, Matthew Fontaine Maury. When I was in 4th grade, and that was here in Virginia, we all had to study Virginia history from an approved textbook. It had a chapter named Pathfinder of the Seas, and that was about Maury. And that story always intrigued me. Living here in the Fredericksburg area and having an interest in the Civil War, I'd often think of Maury whenever I drove past here just touring around battlefields, or whenever I went to a football game in the city stadium. But we'll get back to those place names in just a moment. Then, as part of a research project I was helping with a couple of years ago, I realized that this very interesting man, in fact, this very intriguing man, had done a lot more than simply left his name on a few buildings and a few sites. In fact, Maury had a profound effect on life in the 19th century, and, in spite of his slipping into what I call the dustbin of history, today as well. Now, today, most people who drive by here, and they do a lot, they assume, well, I know who Maury was. But we at History Scene are going to bet that you really don't. Yes, the building is named Maury Commons. The athletic field, Maury Field. But the building used to be James Monroe High School. Then it moved on. Then it acquired the name Maury Elementary. But today, though the building has the name, the function's entirely different. But beyond just a recognition of his name, we bet you don't know many of the things he did, many of the things he stood for. By all accounts, Maury was a mathematical genius. In 1825, he did win an appointment to the U.S. Navy as a midshipman. Now, he walked some and rode a horse all the way from central Tennessee to get to Washington, D.C. to accept that appointment. And that path brought him through Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg, and Stafford, where he still had relatives. Now, it was from here at Belle Plains Landing in Stafford that Maury got on a steamboat and went down this creek and up the Potomac River to Washington to accept his first assignment on the frigate Brandywine. Now, that steamship and that little boat trip up the Potomac were the first experiences this great navigator ever had with sailing anything. We at History Scene are always talking about these layers of history. And while I've just been talking about the Maury getting on a boat incident in 1825, remember what we heard back at the White Oak Museum, that it was also this spot where Union soldiers brought the body of John Wilkes Booth in 1865 as they put it on a ship and took it to Washington. Maury sailed around the world, quite literally. He returned to Spotsylvania County and married what was common at the time, a first cousin. Remember, he was born here, he had family here. Then, as newlyweds, they moved to really this historic site. And yes, I'm kidding, but look what happens when you don't preserve a historic site. The image you're seeing is the home that stood here until the 1950s, but let's consider that. This image is not very good, but it was in this house that Matthew Maury and his wife, Ann Herndon, lived off and on until 1842. Today, the site, as you can see, is just on a windswept plain here next to Charlotte Street in Fredericksburg, next to the fence that separates me from the postal workers. Now, the site here actually relates to something you as History Scene viewers have heard before, because the house was torn down in the 1950s, but it was one of the structures in the Fredericksburg area that was torn down in the name of progress, and the protests against all of these things produced what we now know as Historic Fredericksburg, or HFFI. Now, there are numerous homes in Fredericksburg's various historic districts that claim Matthew Fontaine Maury lived here. But the fact is, it was typical of the times that you'd go from house to house where your relatives lived, particularly if you were like Matt and Ann Maury, that is, poor as church mice, and maybe about supper time there'd be a knock on the door, and there they'd be. And at various other times in their lives, they would come through Fredericksburg and stay with these relatives. Usually, they were Herndons. But while living on this spot, Maury contributed articles to a very famous publication in Richmond, Virginia, the Southern Literary Messenger. That was edited by a man you probably have heard of, Edgar Allan Poe. And while on this site, he wrote his first book, a treatise on navigation, navigation being what he became famous for. Maury is the first person to really develop and put in writing the idea of something that's commonly known today, and that is the rotation of storms being different in the northern hemisphere than from the southern. Now you can sense this. Storms today, and if you got a hurricane off the coast of Virginia, it's rotating counterclockwise. So if I start and I've got my hand up above my equator going counterclockwise, then as soon as you get lower below the equator, it actually turns clockwise. You can do that yourself. Try it. But here's the thing. U.S. and British sailors were trained to sail to the starboard, or right side for us landlubbers, as they faced a storm. That way they'd pick up winds coming in behind them. But if you tried that same maneuver in the southern hemisphere, you were going directly into winds. Maury's little publication helped people navigate better in the southern hemisphere below the equator, and that's when he began to get his name as a navigator. While living here on Charlotte Street, Maury would write letters to the editor, small articles under a pen name so he could be anonymous, and in fact he began doing things on naval reform. It was Maury who, in one of these articles, first proposed what became the Naval Academy, or he hypothesized that there was a route along the ocean floor that later was used to lay the Atlantic cable that greatly enhanced communications between Europe and North America. Maury was just a little ahead of his time on those things. But then after continued naval service, he was on shore leave and he suffered a debilitating injury in a stagecoach accident. Guess where he recuperated? Here in Fredericksburg, here on this site, and at his various family members' homes. But then, while living here, Maury got his big break. He got a new assignment. By 1842, he was again active in the U.S. Navy, but on shore duty, and was appointed the first superintendent of the U.S. Naval Observatory in D.C. He moved his growing family there and stayed there until the Civil War. That old Naval Observatory building still stands on a hill in the Foggy Bottom area of Washington, relatively near the Kennedy Center. While in Washington at the observatory, this mathematics whiz, through the use of the basic scientific method, made some amazing breakthroughs about navigation. By the early 19th century, the standard of ocean navigation was a book by Nathaniel Bowditch of Salem, Massachusetts. This was the navigation that Maury studied in the Navy, and early on he wrote a set of tables that enhanced Bowditch's work. At the observatory, Maury found crates of old log books that had been submitted to the Navy by captains of ships. That had been done for decades. Maury, not only a mathematical genius, could read real fast and just started scanning all of those books. That is, he began culling the data. And what he realized was that in spite of each different year, at the same time each year, currents and winds were the same. Maury kept investigating this and realized, whoa, I can chart this. And he began to develop and print navigational charts and aids that pretty much made him famous as the pathfinder of the seas. Maury's charts were liked by captains because it meant that ships could go faster and safer, something that ship owners liked too. They didn't have to pay insurance claims, or they didn't have to take care of widows and orphans. This is why this pathfinder became important to the navigational system in this country and in fact the world. Maury in essence developed the science of oceanography, and in 1855 he published that science's first textbook called The Physical Geography of the Seas. With the outbreak of the Civil War, Maury did what many Virginians in the U.S. military did. He resigned and went south. Maury went to work for an office in Richmond, but he left Washington and moved his family to, guess where, here in Fredericksburg, and during the war, they resided much of the time in this house at 214 Caroline Street. As he continued his service for Southern causes, he was sent to London, both to continue research, to outfit what we call raiding vessels, but mainly because of his prestige, they wanted him to be out in front to sort of gain recognition for the Confederacy. At the conclusion of the war, he eventually returned to Virginia and taught at Virginia Military Institute, dying in Lexington in 1873. He's buried in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. For his service to science and the Confederacy, he got a statue, this one, on Monument Avenue. And for decades, Virginia children got a holiday on Maury's birthday, January 14th, to celebrate Maury Day. Well, there you have it. We have all of these sites in Fredericksburg we've talked about. We've got the birthplace site out on the modern battlefield, but yet we say you didn't really know all about him. And in a state that produced Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe. Even there, he's largely forgotten. But the U.S. Navy hasn't forgotten. In the margin of all modern Navy charts, there's this quote: based on the researches in the 19th century of Matthew Fontaine Maury while serving as a lieutenant in the United States Navy. We here at History Scene, hoping that you won't forget, want to keep telling you these stories behind our history. Thanks. That was a good clip. Now, Bill, do you have any other favorites?
I especially liked that one in episode 12 where we learned how the word cop came to be. Let's take a look at that.
As the colonies grew between the early 1600s and the American Revolution in the 1780s, governors would appoint sheriffs. Now, a sheriff is a long-established law enforcement position. It's found in England and dates before the Norman Conquest in 1066. But in Virginia, a sheriff was very important. They not only had to enforce the law, they kept the jail, they kept court records, they even called elections. Now get this, they established other positions to help the sheriff. That might be deputies, court clerks, and even an executioner. Now how's that item to be on your job resume? As time went on and cities grew, you had industrialization, immigration, urbanization. Well, they had to form city police forces. Philadelphia was the first to do so in the 1830s. New York formed a police force based on the London model. They were the first to do that. Strangely enough, these new New York City policemen didn't want to wear a uniform. They said it made them seem too much like an army. So instead, they were issued star-shaped copper badges, 8 points. They were placed over their left breast, and thus they were called coppers. That's where our modern term cops comes from. By the 1850s, they were in uniform, however.
My last pick, and that also came from episode 12, was from the Fredericksburg Courthouse and the Revere Bell. I don't know, Scott, for me that just kind of resonated. Let's take a look.
Let's take another look at the Fredericksburg City Courthouse building. This one is not the original. That was built between 1736 and 1740. It was built of brick and modeled closely on the still-standing courthouse in Hanover. Several prominent men practiced law in that old courthouse. You've heard of them: James Monroe, John Marshall, and Bushrod Johnson. That building, though, was later demolished and a new one built in 1852, the one we see here. It was designed by James Renwick. He went on later to build St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York and the Smithsonian Castle, part of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Most people don't know what's in the tower of the courthouse. It goes back to, in 1816, a Mr. Silas Wood of New York married Miss Julia Ann Chew Brock of Fredericksburg. Mr. Wood later gave a bell to her hometown of Fredericksburg. What makes that bell unique, and the one in the tower, is that it comes from the Revere Foundry in Boston, one of only 134 left in this country and the only one in Virginia. Our next pick will be from Scott Eystone, or CB as we call him. Now he's our editor. How are you, CB?
Oh, it's great to be out here on the lake, and my casting arm is fibrillating. I need to put this rod to use. But you probably want to know what my favorite pick is. I think it's Funny Laws from episode 12. I just never cease to be amazed at how silly some of those laws were, and the fact that a lot of them are still on the books.
Let's take a look.
History.
Now, some of the colonial laws, and even those up through the 1800s, seem strange to us. Some are even still enforced today. While writing this episode, our executive producer, Tom Van Winkle, we call him Bear, found some of these very interesting, even strange laws, as I say, still on the books and some, though, we don't want them to be enforced today. Now, there are colonial-era blue laws still in effect in some parts of the country. Those were originally written because they were based on religious beliefs. In effect, in those areas that still have them, stores cannot be open on a Sunday. Now, a drugstore, other businesses with a vital service can be open, however. There's a state law that deals with corrupt practices. It prohibits bribery by any person other than a candidate. Or in Culpeper, you can't wash a mule on the sidewalk. In Norfolk, you can't spit on a seagull. That will not be tolerated. Or how about this? There's a law that says a woman must wear a corset after dark and be accompanied by a male chaperone. By the way, a man could get 60 days in jail for patting a woman's derriere. Or how about in Richmond, a law that prohibits flipping a coin to decide who pays for a cup of coffee. Now here's one close to home. In Stafford County, it is legal for a man to beat his wife on the courthouse steps as long as it's before 8 p.m. Now, I wouldn't like to try that one out. In Virginia Beach, it's illegal to use profanity on Atlantic Avenue or on the boardwalk. Now, under Virginia's blue laws, you are prohibited from doing any business on Sunday. Then, with the exception of has been added to, and it lists about 20 things, which includes everything else. Oh, and by the way, in Virginia, it's illegal to tickle a woman. Well, those are just some of the strange laws here in Virginia, and some of them are still in effect. I'd give you more, but I've got to go home and wash my mule in my backyard, of course. CB, I still can't believe all of those laws, but I'm glad I keep my mule in my backyard. Now, I'm going to pick one, and I've got to do it soon because you never know when Hugo gets here, who knows what he'll pick. The one excerpt I liked was when I found Hugo out walking. Well, wait, you'll see what Hugo was walking. Now, sin was the...
Hey, Scotty boy, I was just out walking my goldfish Goldie. He hates staying in the bowl.
Hugo, I guess I'm not really surprised to see you, but there is no goldfish there.
Uh-oh. You know, I think he escaped. I'll find him on the way home.
But wait a minute, he can't be out of the bag. There's no water. Never mind. But that's okay.
You know, my great-great-great-grandfather, half-time back in time, used to go to church here in Falmouth.
I don't know why that doesn't surprise me either, but it's in the script. Why don't you tell me about it?
Well, you know, he was always... Script? He was always getting in trouble. Half-time was just getting in trouble with the church all the time. He would stay home to watch the football games on TV, and then during the Super Bowl, the church police came, drug him out of his house. They took all the lemon suckets that he'd made for the occasion.
Okay.
It was just awful.
Wait. In colonial days, there was no Super Bowl. There's no church police. That couldn't have happened.
Scott. Why do you think people were stealing all the hogs? They needed to make
Pigskin. Well, I said Hugo might show up, and here he is. How are you, Hugo?
I'm fabulous, Scott. How are you?
Good.
You know, I brought Goldie down, and she's tired of her bowl. Put her in for a swim.
Well, that's great, but what episode have you picked for us?
Oh, you know, I like the time that we got our executive producer, you know, that guy behind the camera over there, when we got him in jail. Oh, that just was so good.
So let's take a look at that.
I don't understand it. Every time I write a screenplay and I want to host this show, he pulls a stunt like this. I can't understand why in the world I'm in this particular environment. I shouldn't be in this environment. Hey, Scott.
Tom, I wouldn't do that to you.
Yes, you would.
Besides,
fans love me. Good grief, man. Huh, let's get out of this claustrophobic place. I'll go out somewhere and I'll tell you what this episode's really about.
Hey, wait a minute, where are you going? Don't leave me here. Hey, I'm directing this thing. Where's there?
Bear,
Milk!
what are you doing in here?
Well, they let me out. Now they got me back in this old one.
But why are you in here? I was just playing a joke.
That wasn't a very funny joke. I didn't know you had me up for hog stealing.
That's what we were talking about.
Well, I didn't read my parole terms. It told me not to get within 100 feet of a hog. So, I was hungry. I went out for a sandwich.
All right. And for a sandwich, you're in jail?
Well, one of the cops that let me out was at the place where I got a sandwich and he saw me.
All right, but you still don't see why you're in jail.
Well, it was a pork sandwich.
Well, now it's Bear's turn to make a pick of an episode.
Bear.
Hold on. I think I got Goldie. No. Not Goldie, but close.
Well, Tom, how you doing and what's your pick?
Well, you know, I think the ye old outtake reel was my best favorite because it just goes to prove my point.
Well, I don't get it. What point is that?
Well, let's just watch and take a look.
By keeping these religious beliefs, I'm going blank, guys.
Two's rolling. One's rolling.
With the colony's survival, religious beef,
Let's go again.
talking there, slander, public drunkenness, and I forget.
They cut 5A1, take 1.
In 1816, a Mr. What's his name that I forget, so let's go to take 2. One of only 134 Revere Bill.
I didn't know you were letting me in Blisnidneberg. And if
Scene 12A, take 3.
Now giggles are coming in. Well, Scott, get it. Cut.
History scene episode 12.
Good.
Scene 12A, take 4.
Don't.
He does. Mine are on purpose.
I don't make mistakes. No, we just don't do it.
Anyway, be sure to watch History Scene.
What?
I said the wrong thing.
You got your mic dangling from you.
I still don't get it.
It just proves the point that I always make. It's the talent that always screws up.
The talent.
Yeah, the
Tom,
talent
you don't
always
know
screws up.
anything.
What do you mean I don't know anything?
Of course
it's always
the talent. It can't be the.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Well, it looks like I started another fight, and we don't know who's going to survive this one. But remember, this is the last of the best of History Scene. September starts our new show, so tune in and see who survives.
It may not be the biggest, it's just a little show with stories of Virginia and places you may know. It's about the times and faces that made us who we are. We'll take you to those places. We'll travel near and far.
Goldie! Oh, Goldie!
Come on!
Get closer.
Baby.
I got Goldie! I got Goldie!
On your TV screen while having fun with good old friends here on History Scene. History around every tree. We have old-time tales to hear and see. Our past will come alive again on your TV screen while having fun with good old friends here on History Scene, where all the places and faces are traces of history. You'll see us then, you'll see us now, here on History Scene.